Chapter 2: The Magic of Quantum Reality. Quantum physics was born on the eve of the 20th century, December 1900. The progenitor was Max Planck. He revealed to us the other face of light, the particulate manifestation baptized quantum. This was the outcome of a long battle that started in the Western world with Zeno and Aristotle in their attempt to determine whether objects move in a continuous or discontinuous manner. From the physics of motion, we found ourselves catapulted in a web of paradoxes as we discover many hidden faces of reality. The physicists coming after Max Planck made more and more startling discoveries and revealed to us many principles inherent to our universe that contradict the classical tenets of our common sense reality and that of science itself. But we've already learned from the dialecticians that contradiction is not negation of reality. Contradictions and paradoxes are part of the makeup of the universe, like impermanence and alternation of order and chaos. However, many intellectuals have tried to imprison the world within the confines of the Euclidean and Newtonian laws. The new principles have created an uproar. Briefly, we can enumerate the principle of indeterminism or uncertainty of Heisenberg, the principle of duality of Louis de Broglie, the principle of complementarity and the principle of correspondence of Niels Bohr, the superposition principle, the principle or law of least effort, the principle of ubiquity, the bidirectional arrow of time, the parallel universes, the tens or more dimensions of reality, the crisscrossing of the principles themselves, the Poincaré return, the objectivity of nature as determined by our subjectivity. We can understand why, between the two world wars, poets began to search for a more comprehensive reality and spawned the Surrealist movement. By 1970, Robert March published a book entitled Physics for Poets. Of course, poets are not afraid of ridicule. The truly gifted ones are already living in more than one plane of reality, and they have experienced firsthand the interplay of subjectivity and objectivity. The scientific establishment has worked very hard through the centuries to establish the parameters of objectivity in order to present an outside world untainted by the vagaries of our subjectivity. In Physics for Poets, Robert March explained that by keeping man on the sideline as a disinterested observer, Galileo and his rationalist colleagues had hoped to discover a reality free from the human mind's subjectivity. But 3.5 centuries later, his intellectual offspring were denying that such a split or division was possible. It seems that we are back to the time of the pre Socratic philosophers who were first initiated into the mysteries religions before being introduced into the physical sciences. There is the likelihood that a modern scientist can be a seer, a poet, or a mystic. All of these disciplines would play a role in penetrating the secrets of nature. Quantum physics tells us that the mental construct of the autistic mind or the Upanishadic seer is no different than that of a Newton or an Einstein. It is rather an illusion to think that in our observation or measurement of the physical and external world, our subjectivity or inner self is an interfering with is not interfering with or creating that concrete reality. Let's take that again. It is rather an illusion to think that in our observation or measurement of the physical and external world, our subjectivity or inner self is not interfering with or creating that concrete reality. We can pretty much accept the fact that the sense perception of a Haitian Vodou priest, a Hougan or Boko, is different from that of an American Episcopalian bishop or Jewish rabbi as far as their subjectivity is concerned. But to think that we are observers, but to think that what one observes in our scientific studies of nature appears to depend upon what one chooses to observe seems far fetched. But to think that what one observes in our scientific studies of nature appears to depend upon what one chooses to observe seems far fetched. In other words, objective observation alone is not the order of things. The subjectivity of the subject determines the appearance of nature. It is like reiterating the postulate of the author of the epistle to the Hebrew, probably St. Paul, in reference to faith. Hebrews 11, verse 1 reads, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." This is the startling revelation of quantum mechanics. We are making a choice at every moment. We are constantly creating the world. Consciously or unconsciously, we are making an act of faith, a choice at every instant. Without awareness, we can continue to ridicule the faithful. It, with that awareness, can we continue to ridicule the faithful in his belief? He knows that his subjectivity can change the world. He walks by faith, not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5, verse 7. The Christian Messiah taught his disciples likewise. Let it be to you according to your faith. Matthew 9, verse 29. Likewise, the theoretical physicist teaches us that what we think ultimately influences what we observe in the physical reality. Worse yet, atoms may not exist without observers of atoms. A far reaching conclusion is what determines the fate of the animal in Schrodinger's cat experiment. Consider a closed steel cage containing radioactive material, a Geiger counter in a photocell stripping a circuit that allows a poisonous prussic acid to fill the cage with to fill the cage when a radioactive particle strikes the photocell. We place a cat into the cage. After half an hour, what will we find in the cage? A living cat or a dead one? As time goes on, two editions of the cat will appear in the cage, and one dead, one alive, like in a surrealist painting of Picasso or Salvador Dali. Likewise, the observer is of two minds while awaiting to open the cage. A happy mind expecting to uncover a live cat, and a sad one expecting to discover a dead cat. What controls the destiny of the animal in the cage? The quantum physics answer is that you do. The observer controls the destiny. Your subjectivity and your expectations determine the status of the cat. Max Planck's revelation of the quanta, particles of light, or tiny bundles of energy, was a blow to the scientific establishment of his time. The history of the nature of light reveals a tug of war between models. The ancient Egyptians and Greeks speculated about the particle presentation. The French philosopher René Descartes conceived of a wave model on purely philosophical ground. He was to be followed by the French mathematician Pierre de Fermat and the Dutch physicist Christian Huygens. But Isaac Newton returned to the particle model. Christian Huygens is considered the founder of the wave theory with the argument that light rays can pass undisturbed through each other, while particles would suffer perturbations by collisions. The triumph of the wave theory came with James Maxwell's prediction that oscillating electrical charges should emit electromagnetic waves. This became a reality 20 years later with the works of the German physicist Heinrich Rudolf Hertz. For the intellectuals of the 19th century, including physicists, theologians, and poets, it looked like nature had revealed all its secrets. The French poet Alfred de Musset stated that All has been said, and that he came too late in a world too old. The Graf Wellhausen school of Old Testament higher criticism in Germany, with their methods, was supposed to have the last word. Some philosophers of science claim that physics would degenerate into an accumulation of irrelevant details to complete the pyramid of knowledge composed of classical mechanics and classical electromagnetic theory. At the very end of the 19th century, on December 14th, 1900, Max Planck's demonstration of quantum was accepted. He explained that all the properties of thermal radiation could be explained by assuming that light is emitted and absorbed by atoms in tiny energy bundles. This was corroborated by Albert Einstein's light photons, which are small particle like energy bundles. This was proven by the careful experimental study of the photoelectric effect by several other experimental physicists. Reality was telling us that light, seen as energy by our mental construct up to now, was also a, a particulate entity with a mass capable of knocking off electrons, another particulate entity from a metal surface. The, let me take that again. What did he say? Reality was telling us that light, seen as energy by our mental construct up to now, was also a particulate entity with a mass capable of knocking off electrons, another particulate entity, from a metal surface. The classical wave theory of light fails miserably to explain that photoelectric effect. This dilemma revealed to us the boundary constraints imposed on our choice of reality. We were in a quandary between two models of reality. On the one hand, we had the photoelectric effect and the particle model. On the other was the wave model of light that offers the only convincing explanation of diffraction and interference seen through Thomas Young's double slit experiment. We were forced to face and live with a paradox, that is, something in our universe that has a double nature. Hmm, let me take that from here again. The classical theory, the classical wave theory of light fails miserably to explain that photoelectric effect. This dilemma revealed to us the boundary constraints imposed on our choice of reality. we were in a we were in a quandary between two models of reality. On the one hand, we had the photoelectric effect and the particle model. On the other was the wave model of reality that offers the only convincing explanation of diffraction and interference seen through Thomas Young's double slit experiment. We were forced to face and live with a paradox, that is, something in our universe that has a double nature. Light was at the same time wave and particle. Or, as Louis de Broglie put it, the particles must have a wave nature. He used mathematical equations to prove it. These equations imply that light particles have wave properties, frequency, and wavelength. Erwin Schrödinger seconded de Broglie's ideas in his elaborate mathematical theory called wave mechanics, in which the propagation of particles through space and time is described with an identical equation governing propagation of electromagnetic waves. Hence, it became evident that nature was forcing upon us a new mental construct or a new apperception of reality, where a principle of duality is preeminent. Things were no longer simply black or white. The consequence was that matter, like light, has a dual nature. Nature can exist in two different states: a massive state and a wave state, or both at the same time. These ideas were developed by Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg and were accepted by a majority of physicists as the most acceptable interpretation of quantum physics. Their viewpoint is referred to as the Copenhagen School. However, Other founders of the quantum theory, such as Planck, Einstein, and Schrodinger, have their reservations. They were not ready to accept, on the whole, the metaphysics of the Copenhagen school. In considering the inner structure of the atom, that school came out with the idea that an electron does not have a continuous orbit. Bohr's atom has multiple orbits, and the electron can jump from one orbit to the next. This is associated with emission of lights or radiation. This is associated with emission of lights or radiation. The paradox is that the electron can occupy all these orbits at the same time. This is the principle of ubiquity. The double slit experiment also reveals that novel property of nature. The particle can be in many locations at the same time. That is a concept heretofore associated with the alternate reality of the divine or spiritual world. Now, at the atomic level, we see a composite state where a particle has several positions, several momenta, and several values for other physical quantities. A corollary to the state of ubiquity is the superposition principle that indicates that a physical entity can be in a state in which several classical contradictory properties are superimposed onto each other. In common sense parlance, we can say that in any entity, one can find up and down, good and bad, love and hate, life and death, or sinfulness and blamelessness. We can say, by the way, that in biology, as well as in the spiritual world, the composite state is not such a non ordinary thing. We will consider that in more detail later on. See also the principle of complementarity. The superposition principle appears as a logical outcome of Bohr's concept of wave particle duality, of de Broglie visualizing his snake swallowing its tail, waveform of the electron, and Schrodinger's waveform, which is a combination of all the waves of electrons in an atom presented as one wave. Another key feature of the superposition state is that 1 plus 1 can equal 0. What? Another key feature of the superposition state is that 1 plus 1 can equal 0, 1, 2, or any number in between. Like in the case of ubiquity, this new aspect of reality used to be the hallmark of the divine or spiritual world. The Christian Messiah stated that the Father and He are one. Christian dogma states the Trinity is based on the principle that 1 plus 1 plus 1 equal 1, as well as 3. This gives us a superposition of states, a triad superimposed on unity, one God in three persons. Take my words for it, as the Haitian physicist Parnell Marc used to say in pre-med in 1959. In creating his church, which is the body of Christ, the Christian Messiah introduced the fourth figure in the unity of the Trinity. He is in the church, and the church is in him. Here by church, I mean all the denominations, not only the Catholic branch. In spiritual mathematics, 3 plus 1 equals 1, and the church became part of the Godhead, so much so that the Pope is the vicar of Christ on earth, and some Christian Gnostics are proposing the godlike nature of man. Albert Einstein was not very comfortable with the extrapolations of Bohr and Heisenberg. The superposition state implies that a particle in a composite state does not have a superposition and a momentum. It gets them only when the scientist proceeds to make measurements. Let's take that again. Albert Einstein was not very comfortable with the extrapolations of Bohr and Heisenberg. The superposition state implies that a particle in a composite state does not have a position and momentum. It gets them only when the scientist proceeds to make measurements. This is a very delicate situation. It tells us a lot about the sense perception of reality. It is our interaction that gives reality to the position and momentum of a particle and to the particle itself. It seems that the particle does not have an objective, external presence by itself. In a nutshell, it does not exist. It is an entity existing only in the imagination of the physicist. The Copenhagen theory was on the same wavelength as the idealist philosophers of the caliber of Berkeley and the Far Eastern thinkers. Einstein could not accept this mystical approach to science. According to Otto H. Thimer, he had a quasi religious belief in an objective world endowed with its essential qualities, independent of the instruments and the speculating mind of the physicist. To prove his point, Einstein came up with a Gedanken, or thought experiment, that shows that particles have definite positions and momenta at each moment in time, even if physicists cannot measure them. This theoretical experiment is known as the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen argument and was published May 15th, 1935 in the Physical Review under the title Can Quantum Mechanical Description of Physical Reality be Considered Complete? The authors tried to prove that even with quantum mechanics, they can predict with certainty both position and momentum of an object, but not at the same time. The authors tried to prove that even with quantum mechanics, they can predict with certainty both position and momentum of an object, but not at the same time. Having accepted the limitations imposed by other uneasy principle, by that other uneasy principle called the uncertainty principle of Heisenberg. However, Einstein and his colleagues, Podolsky and Rosen, EPR, maintained that the object must have had both quantities, position and momentum, beforehand, independent of the time the prediction is made. In other words, they must exist potentially. For this, the scientists use the example of the colliding balls representing neutrons colliding with molecules. There, a neutron is deflected from its original position, from its original direction of motion by a molecule that acts as a diffraction grating. According to the Copenhagen team, the actual direction of a neutron can be deduced from the point of impact on a distant screen. But before that impact, the neutron is in a composite state with all kinds of momenta and therefore no momentum at all. It goes likewise for the distracting molecule, which had recoiled into the, into the opposite direction. And by virtue of the conservation of momentum, has acquired a momentum equal and opposite to that of the deflected neutron. However, in the EPR experiment, the deflection neutron is measured at a very large distance from the molecule, and from that location, they have deduced what direction or momentum it had after colliding with the molecule. For the Copenhagen physicists, measurement of the neutron cannot help predict measurement of the molecule. But for Einstein and company, there is a way to do just that, to have measurements of the molecule and the neutron at the same time. To do this, they use the postulate of the conservation of momentum, which is a fundamental tenet of the Copenhagen school. Unfortunately, in the present case, this tenet undermines the concept of composite states in its foundation. Since the molecule is not affected at all by the measurements on the neutron because of the great distance, there can be no change in its real physical state. If we find that the molecule has a definite momentum after the observation of the neutron, it is because it had that definite momentum all along. Thus, in Einstein's view, that is proof that the molecule is part of the objective external reality, having always a position and a momentum. The same holds true for the neutron because of the conservation laws. To think otherwise would require the introduction of another weird paradox, that of an instantaneous momentum transfer between the neutron and the molecule immediately after the faraway neutron is measured. In this case, the transfer would take place over a vast distance, with a speed exceeding the speed of light. This would be the heresy of the tachyon, a particle that has speed greater than that of light. The concept of panpsychic field, a wave function permeating the world universe, seems to fill well the tachyon heresy. However, in either case, we are trapped in a quandary with the vision of either team. The conservation laws destroy the foundation of composite states, and at the same time, Einstein's action at a distance destroys his special theory of relativity. Let me take that again. The conservation laws destroy the foundation of of the composite states, and at the same time, Einstein's action at the distance destroys his special theory of relativity. The completeness of quantum theory would mean two particles that had previously interacted could still affect each other after they have been well separated. The particles need not be anywhere near one another to affect each other. This is the demise of the necessary conditions of any logical or causal apperception of physical reality. Einstein was not ready to accept this heresy. He concluded that quantum theory is inadequate and incomplete since it involves such unphysical, non local correlations that constitute a violation of causality. There are regions of space that that cannot be connected with the point of impact of the neutron on the screen, even via speed of light signals. Yet these regions correlate instantaneously with the measurements made there. What is responsible for this unusual weird phenomenon? The mind or wave function of the observer himself? The mere observation of that neutron sends out instantaneous repercussions to the farthest confines of the cosmos, with no other explanation than the analogy of a boko, voodoo priest, hurting someone located miles away by performing a magical act, wanga, in his humfo or temple. The reason behind this peculiar property is that the wave function of the observer, that is his mind, is part of an abstract field that pervades the whole universe. An observation at any given region causes the transformation of the state of potentiality to a state of actuality that becomes manifest everywhere in the cosmos at one and the same instant. This is another illustration of the power of the mind to create reality. Einstein and his followers lost the battle. There seemed to exist faster than light connections between distant locations of space-time. This was confirmed in 1982 by Alain Aspect and his team at the Institut d'Optique Théorique et Appliquée in Paris. Two particles separated by a wide distance in the universe become somehow one single physical entity through the abstract panpsychic field. Nevertheless, this does not constitute a violation of the special theory of relativity because there is no information transferred between the two regions. According to the Coveney and High field, according to Coveney and High field in The Arrow of Time, as the non-local correlations become evident only after comparing the data long after the experiment has been conducted. In the EPR argument, Einstein maintained that no physical theory is complete unless every element of the physical reality or real world has a definite counterpart in the physical world. Interesting. In the EPR argument, Einstein maintained that no physical theory is complete unless every element of the physical reality or real world has a definite counterpart in the physical. Okay, hold on. In the EPR argument, Einstein maintained that no physical theory is complete unless every element of the physical reality or real world has a definite counterpart in the physical world. So, physical reality or real world has a definite counterpart in the physical world, in the physical theory. Okay. Thus, quantum theory does not have this one to one correspondence. There is no theoretical element in quantum theory to correspond with each individual event in physical reality. The theory can predict only probabilities, but no individual events. Therefore, according to Albert Einstein, the quantum theory is incomplete. This has been a basic issue in Bohr Einstein debates. The EPR argument for the incompleteness of quantum theory is based upon the assumption that the real physical situation of one region cannot depend on what an experimenter does in a faraway location. If this was to occur, one must assume that the measurement in the first location, S1, can telepathically alter the real situation in the second location, or one must deny the existence of independent real situations for things that are spatially separated from each other. Einstein could not accept these alternatives. However, many physicists believe that at a deep and fundamental level, there is no such thing as independent real situations or things that have interacted in the past but come to be separated spatially thereafter. Thus, changing the measuring device in S1 does change the real physical situation in S2. That is, that is contrary to the logic of our common sense reality, which requires local causes for transfer of information. Let me take that again. Thus, changing the measuring device in S1 does change the real physical situation in S2. That is contrary to the logic of our common sense reality, which requires local causes for transfer of information. In 1964, John Stuart Bell, a Scottish physicist at the European Organization for Nuclear Research, CERN, in Switzerland, showed in a theorem that either the statistical predictions of quantum theory are false, or the principle of local causes is false. In other words, Bell mathematically proves that if the statistical predictions of quantum theory are correct, then many of our common sense ideas about the universe are severely mistaken or profoundly deficient. Furthermore, Bell's theorem shows that our common sense ideas are inadequate, also in the description of macroscopic phenomena or events of the everyday world. Bell's theorem is based on correlations between paired particles like those in the EPR experiment. However, this experiment was still a hypothetical construct until 1972, when John Clauser and Stuart Friedman at the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory actually performed the experiment to confirm or disprove the predictions of quantum theory. By this, they proved the existence of superluminal tachyonic communication. This received further proof in 1982 when Alain Aspect at the Institute of Optics in Paris repeated the Clauser-Friedman experiment with a twist, that is, changing the settings on the measuring devices at the last microsecond. Thus, physicists 82 years after Max Planck's discovery of quantum are forced to accept the possibility that superliminal transfer of information between distant events may be an integral aspect of our physical reality. Let me take that again. Thus, physicists 82 years after Max Planck's discovery of quantum are forced to accept the possibility that superliminal transfer of information between distant events may be an integral aspect of our physical reality. This is so because the separate parts in the universe are not separate at all. According to David Bohm, parts are seen to be in immediate connection, in which their dynamical relationships depend in an irreducible way on the state of the whole system, and indeed on that of broader systems in which they are contained, extending ultimately and in principle to the entire universe. Thus, one is led to a new notion of unbroken wholeness, which denies the classical idea of analyzability of the world into separate and independently existent parts. Superliminal tachyonic quantum connectedness appears to be a possible explanation for some psychic phenomena such as telepathy. The interaction between the observer and the particles through the panpsychic field reveals to us a great wonder in our ordinary reality. Quantum mechanics is revealing to us other dimensions of our common sense reality, dimensions that were therefore that were heretofore assigned to non-ordinary or alternate realities. Let's take that again. The interaction between the observer and the particles through the panpsychic field reveals to us a great wonder in our ordinary reality. Quantum mechanics is revealing to us other dimensions of our common sense reality, dimensions that were heretofore assigned to non ordinary or alternate realities. The principle of duality of de Broglie is a fact of life, a fact of existence. The wave particle duality exists at the subatomic level as well as at the scale of the human being. Niels Bohr and his school of philosophy have stated repeatedly that the wave particle duality and the mind body duality are identical phenomena, and both are subject to the same paradoxes revealed by quantum mechanics. By demonstrating the wave nature of the particle, Louis de Broglie has established once and for all that the basic substance of the particle and of the whole universe is energy. That energy, with its multiple manifestations, potential, kinetic, electromagnetic radiations, weak force, strong force, and gravity, is in essence a psychic field. The panpsychic field moves by instantaneous propagation, while light particles move only at 300,000 kilometers per second, very slowly in a sense. That slowness resulted from the evolution into mass or particles such as photon, gluon, weakon, and graviton that are bundles of energy. The superstrings theory shows that the tiniest particles of matter are incredibly short strings of energy. Those strings of matter coil and join to form 10 other dimensions at the infinitesimal end of the universe scale. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin saw the evolution of the universe toward man as a process of complexification. Thus, the appearance of life and man in the cosmos is not such a freak of nature, a haphazard phenomenon, but a natural end product of complexification, a process that is still at work and will produce in the future a spiritual man. What we observe at the scale of man exists at all levels of the evolutionary ladder. Biological life is only one aspect of life. Man's intelligence is only a remarkable expression at our level of an essence shared by everything in the cosmos. All is life, psychism, and motion. Here, quantum physics seems to join St. Paul's vitalism in the letter to the Romans and the mysticism of the Far East. According to Otto Eichheimer, the accompanying wave of a particle is an immaterial quantity stretched over vast regions of space. According to Otto Eichheimer, the accompanying wave of a particle is an immaterial quantity stretched over vast regions of space, very distant from the location of the point light particle. He sees a similitude between the wave and the soul, The wave would be the soul or the mind of the photon or the electron. The mass of the particle would be analogous to our body. Thymus sees the relationship as two separate, different entities married together, like an addition of 1 plus 1 equals 2. But the real dualism of quantum physics is a 1 plus 1 equals 1, and as such is a common property of the whole cosmos. Space time began as energy or force and was essentially life, psychism, and motion. It has evolved towards Homo sapiens and will evolve further into an omega state. Teilhard, 1949. A spiritual man in the Pauline vision. It is wrong to equate mind only as a result of physical chemical processes, but rather it is a physical chemical but rather it is the physical chemical processes that are various manifestations of mind or the panpsychic field. The fact is that we can equate the functions of our mind to the wave function of the particle. From a practical point of view, we can speak of the mind as the psychological function of the biological entity man, a function among many other functions, such as the circulatory, excretory, digestive, reproductive function. But all of these functions are manifestations of the psychic field, which is the essence of existence. Thus, our mind body duality is two different expressions of a unique essence. Our body is composed of packets, bundles, or quanta of energy, giving us a localization, a position in space time, while at the same time, the wave function aspect is all over the cosmos continuum. At times, the wave function of our composite self, can act as a completely separate entity and probably can survive the death or the disaggregation of the particles forming our body or massive state. This will open the door for an insight into the paradoxical phenomena taking place in the alternate reality of the Voduns, as their wave function persists in the composite state with the body doubles. Quantum reality and its paradoxes do not exist only at the atomic level of existence. It is present in biology alongside the classical laws of causality. Most of the mechanisms governing biological entities are controlled by electrochemical processes that encompass huge numbers of atoms and macromolecules. In the 50 trillion cells that compose the body of a newborn, 6 trillion reactions take place in each cell every second. Goodness gracious. Many of them are deterministic in nature or follow the laws of cause and effect. However, according to quantum theory, nature and biology in particular are not deterministic in all details. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle imposes a limit on how accurately we can obtain knowledge of nature through our scientific methodology. For its more popular expression, Heisenberg's principle states that the position and the momentum of a particle cannot be measured with accuracy. It seems that the tenets of classical mechanics break down when a system is too small. A detailed description of an electron orbit within the small system is impossible. This limitation is intimately associated with the fact that the probe or instrument used is a particle of the same size and mass as the object under scrutiny. Thus, it is the perturbation of the object induced by the probe that is responsible for the unavoidable errors. Some philosophers opposed to the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics claim that the uncertainty principle is not correct. But Bohr and Heisenberg, after experimenting with many measuring processes, remain adamantly convinced that the uncertainty principle is valid in all cases. Thus, the epistemological implications of the Heisenberg's principle are the provisory value of our science and the boundary constraints imposed on our methodologies. Like many scientists before them, the Copenhagen theorists tend to extrapolate very much. Most scientists would agree with them that between the two sets of laws governing the world, classical and quantum, the latter is more basic and fundamental. When the Euclidean Newtonian universe appears to dominate, it is because of change in scale. But a statement like, there is no reality until that reality is perceived, is too metaphysical in nature, or a statement is too metaphysical in nature, or a statement that all classical ideas about the world had to be abandoned, is too unilateral and ignores the dialectics of nature. This is true particularly after Bohr had discovered an existing feature of the new physics that it applied just where it is necessary. When the world in its dimensions appeared to be continuous, the rules of quantum corresponded with the classical rules. This is known as the principle of correspondence. In our everyday transactions with our fellow men, it is the classical rules that appear to predominate. But from time to time, a quantum manifestation will erupt into our common sense reality to overcome the cause and effect sequences. This is what is called the causality violation. Let's take that again. In our everyday interactions with our fellow men, it is the classical rules that appear to predominate. But from time to time, a quantum manifestation will erupt into our common sense reality to overcome the cause and effect sequences. This is what is called a causality violation, or to reverse the space time arrow in the the premonitory kick by letting the future coincide with the present. We will see in more detail later on this phenomenon in which the future determines the past or the present. Another corollary of the principle of correspondence and the principle of duality or composite states is Bohr's principle of complementarity. The paradoxical nature of these principles created some uneasiness in the minds of many physicists, including Bohr himself, who finally accepted them when he discovered the principle of complementarity, which acted as a salve, safety valve, salve against the let's see against the untoward effects or harmful features of the paradoxes in observable phenomena. The rationale was that this principle implies that superposition or composite states with several different mutually incompatible qualities exists only in the mathematical abstraction of quantum theory and is not conducive to contradictory observable phenomena. The composite state collapses under measurement and cannot be perpetuated. The principle of complementarity redeems the situation of incompatibility by postulating that in any experiment a particle behaves either as pure wave or pure particle. Bohr's conviction is that the principle of complementarity is one of the most fundamental philosophical tenets that govern our universe. He thinks that opposites, like living cells and inanimate matters, body and mind, causality and free will, are mutually exclusive in the realm of observable phenomena, being controlled by boundary constraints of the principle of complementarity. However, Bohr's extrapolation on the principle of complementarity's restraining power is not all powerful in every domain of nature. In biology, the superposition or composite states are everyday occurrences. Viruses, as preliminary life forms, keep their inanimate matter structure while being living organisms. Microbiologists seem to think that viruses are aggressive forms of unicellular organisms confined into parasitism. However, they could well present the transitory step from inanimate matter to cellular life forms. Here, the superposition principle leads to harmony and permanent or transitory coexistence of opposites. In the realm of medicine, it is at the core of many abnormal entities that are harmful. The loss of blood in a causality fashion leads to low blood pressure and eventually to shock when the hemorrhage is massive and fast. In anemia, which is also a blood loss induced at a slower pace, we observe the paradoxical high blood pressure. Heart failure is usually associated with a low output in blood circulation, but in an overactive thyroid and in anemia, we can observe high output failure, with swelling or massive fluid retention seen in liver failure or heart failure. We can observe kidney failure on the basis of lack of liquid going to the kidney. Dehydration is often causally related to salt depletion, but paradoxically, we often observe a dehydrated individual with high salt. Also, some dehydrated patients can come with, with very high blood pressure when we would expect low blood pressure. This paradoxical situation is caused by the response of a chemical system whose job is to retain salt when sensors warn of depletion. The treatment of this hypertension is not a fluid pill, diuretics, but intravenous fluid administration. In a dreadful condition called DIC, disseminated intravascular coagulation, people begin bleeding when, paradoxically, blood clot formation is taking place all over the body. The treatment consists, among other things, to administer heparin, a blood thinner that usually makes people bleed. The reason behind the composite state is the fact that the disseminated clot formation are using up their clotting factors and the process must be stopped by heparin. In the disorder called hypothyroidism, underactive thyroid, the individual becomes nonchalant, dumb, quiet, and lethargic to the point that sometimes he does not drink or eat. We have observed situations in which the patient becomes violent, loud, and agitated. This is called low thyroid madness, and the treatment is administration of the deficient thyroid hormone. One on more familiar ground in sugar diabetes, mellitus, we have an organism full of calories or sugar while the patient is losing weight, like in saturation. In a dreadful complication of diabetes called hyperosmolar state, the individual blood sugar may be in the range of 900 milligrams to 1300 milligrams per deciliter. If it goes untreated, the patient will lose a tremendous amount of weight in a few days. The paradox comes from the fact that the calories are available, but they are not used up. It is like a millionaire cannot use his money to pay his bills. In autoimmune diseases such as lupus, the individual's own defense mechanisms turn their heavy weapons against him because they identify him paradoxically as the enemy. Health itself is a typical composite state. In order to maintain that happy state of good health, a paradoxical war is waging at every instant on all fronts, inside and outside the body, against a large variety of aggressors, microbes, toxins, pollutants, and diverse physical chemical invaders. In our space time, particularly in the common sense reality, everything around us seems to follow the law of cause and effect. The classical science, erected in that same spatio-temporal reality, is governed by the same principle of causality. The world is a system of particles in submission to the laws of classical mechanics and electrodynamics. The positions and velocities of all particles in the cosmos are given at one time, and they are determined by the laws of nature for the future as well as for the past. Those measurements determine the state of the universe, including infatuation of guys for beautiful gals. Thus, the fate of the cosmos is rigidly established by the laws of nature throughout, throughout past, present, and future. By virtue of that principle of causality, everything is determined and occurs in accordance with the laws of nature. A mammoth sophisticated computer called the Beast by the doomsday prophets of one world order under the Antichrist would be able to store all the present information about the world and predict every future event. For many authorities in classical physics, scientific explanation is the application of the principle of causality. Science not based on that principle is inconceivable. However, quantum physics came with a different view of the world and stated that nature is not deterministic in all details and spoke of the breakdown of causality. Quantum mechanics as a statistical theory can only assign probabilities of occurrence. Quantum mechanics as a statistical theory can only assign probabilities of occurrence. The actual values of particle positions, velocities, and others cannot be predicted or determined by the laws of physics with total accuracy. Furthermore, beyond that indeterminacy, the new physics was claiming that the natural sequence of cause and effect could be reversed in a topsy turvy manner. Einstein's theory of relativity was there to prove that such an occurrence is not of this world. For the example of a rifle fired at a target, an observer can witness four possibilities, depending on his own traveling time. If he is in a supersonic jet going at a matching speed with the bullet, the latter would seem, the latter would almost seem to be at a standstill. Right? The bullet would seem to be at a standstill, and the target would be racing toward the bullet. Goodness gracious. If his jet speeded up and moved faster than the bullet, the latter would appear to move backward while still advancing towards the target. Now, if the bullet moves at twice the speed of light while the jet is flying at half light speed, we would see the rifle firing and the bullet reaching the target at the same time. The rifle firing and the bullet reaching the target. That is, if the bullet moves at twice the speed of light while the jet is moving at half the speed of light. Okay. But if our jet reached a speed greater than half the speed of light, we would see the whole scene running backwards. Oh my god. Hold on, I need to read that again. But if our jet reached a speed greater than half light speed, we would see the whole scene running backwards. Wow. Is that what's happening in the movie Tenet? Hmm. But if our jet reached a speed greater than half light speed, we would see the whole scene running backwards. But what's the speed of the bullet though? If the bullet moves at twice the speed of light while our jet is flying at half light speed, so does that mean the bullet is still moving at twice the speed of light? But now the jet is moving at more than half the speed of light. But if our jet, I'll take it from here and just keep going. If our jet reached a speed greater than half light speed, we would see the whole scene running backwards. The target would explode, sending the bullet back toward the mouth of the rifle, where it would penetrate the barrel and resume the quiet status of an undischarged ammunition. What? I need to go back. What's going on here? Einstein's theory of relativity was there to prove that such an occurrence is not of this world. For the example of a rifle fired at a target, an observer can witness four. So you're telling me that if the jet reached a speed greater than half the speed of light, we would see the whole scene running backwards, meaning the target explodes, sending the bullet back toward the mouth of the rifle, where it would penetrate the barrel and resume the quiet status of an undischarged ammunition. So the target, oh my God, I'm just going to keep going. It's ridiculous. This is out of hand. Um, that last situation illustrates what is called a causality violation. You don't say. The cause comes after the effect. What in the world? I don't even have to go look up what the definition of cause is now. So the cause comes after the effect. But because such a heresy cannot exist, right? Something moving faster than light, causality violation is an impossibility. Tachyons do not exist in our ordinary reality. Okay? However, the EPR paradox has shown that simultaneous events can occur in different locations to two objects that were previously in contact, like the Corsican brothers. In other words, quantum mechanics could allow an observer of a physical quantity of one of a pair of previously connected particles to create a similitude in the other particle or object. The two objects formerly connected could be light years apart, but as soon as an observation is made on one of them, the second would immediately assume a similar value. That connection is baptized by Fred Alan Wolf as the Einstein connection. It has been concluded that something must go from the location of the first particle or from the first particle or object to the second one, and that something, in quotes, something moves with a speed faster than light. It is the tachyonic psychic panpsychic field. Tachyonic panpsychic field. That field establishes the connection and creates the similitude. There is no cause and effect relation between the two occurrences. Observers located in opposite time orders can view the first object as the cause of the second, or the second as the cause of the first. Observers located in opposite time orders can view the first object as the cause of the second, or the second as the cause of the first. Interesting. The physicist John A. Wheeler's double slit experiment with a light source and a rotary non permanent light sensitive film emulsion screen mounted in the back of slits illustrates causality violation. Um, that screen can be raised up to capture a photon or lowered to let the photon continue its journey until it reaches one of two where is that? Until it reaches one of two telescopes placed directly along a line in back of each slit. The experimenter obtains an interference pattern when he raises the screen because the single photon has passed through both slits. When he leaves the screen down, the photon passes through one slit and reaches the telescope in line with that slit. And that telescope measures the particle like property of the photon. So far, this is business as usual. But here's the rub: the screen isn't rotated into position until well after the particle has journeyed through the slits. The experimenter has made up his mind at the very last minute. In spite of that delay, his choice determines the path of the photon. The effect has come before the cause. The effect is the late choice of the experimenter, and the cause is the late choice of the experimenter, and the effect is the path already taken in advance by the photon. In that breakdown of causality, the future is determining the past. Interesting. In that breakdown of causality, the future is determining the past. Could this be explained by the influence of the tachyonic psychic field? The physicist John G. Kramer of the University of Washington has another interpretation. It is called the transactional interpretation. Kramer has stipulated that the quantum wave is a real physical wave that propagates through spacetime. That wave is always associated with the conjugate wave, which is also real, but with a time twist. It runs backwards through time and collapses back at the source. Thus, it interacts with the quantum wave and modulates it. Kramer labels the original quantum wave an alpha wave and the conjugate one an echo wave. In the case of John A. Wheeler's experiment, it is the conjugate echo wave that passes through both slits, backward from the future toward the present, and is perceived by the light source. If the screen is down, the alpha wave passes again through both slits toward the telescopes. If the screen is up, it absorbs the photon in its film emulsion and sends back through time a conjugate echo wave passing through the slits and is received by the light source. The panpsychic field is more conducive to spiritual phenomenon occurring in our world but belonging to the dimensions of non-ordinary reality. In Christian mysticism, the ritual of baptism established a quantum connection between the resurrected Messiah and the believer, so that their fate is intimately sealed forever. Prayer is an instantaneous propagation of information going at tachyonic speed. That connection opens the door to a dimension outside space time called eternity. The Hindu devotee who touches or looks at an icon does that with the purpose of establishing a link between the god and himself. Thus, the mandira, or temple, is a sacred place where two realities intersect and intertwine. Through the devotions of puja ritual at home, the devotee establishes an intimate contact with the deity by bathing, adorning, touching, and seeing the icon. That link is a quantum connection that seals the destiny of the devotee to that of the god. In the Hugar or Boko alternate reality, quantum connection enters in the formulation of amulet, wanga, a spell, and lycanthropism. The Hunsi or initiate has a very light connection with a Loa that requires a special ritual to separate them at the adept's death. That ritual is known under the name of Desunin. John G. Kramer's transactional interpretation of quantum events can be applied to more mundane or familiar occurrences of everyday life, such as the premonitory kick. That quantum event is very prevalent in the Haitian mental construct. It also exists in other cultures in Europe and America with some variants. It is opposed to be it is supposed to be a warning system. When I inadvertently kicked my right foot against something, I received a notice of bad omen. Something disagreeable is going to happen. When I kicked my left foot against something, it is notice of good omen. For most people in my country, it is the other way around. It is that way with me because I am left handed. I have been experiencing it from my childhood on into adulthood. Like everything in Quiffland, to use the word of Fred Allen Wolfe, it is affected by indeterminacy. It is very capricious. We can go months or weeks without experiencing it, and one day suddenly it is back into your life. So many of us have learned to ignore it. Here are a few examples. I'm on my way to the library to obtain a book that I want badly as a reference. As I'm about to enter my car, I inadvertently kick my right foot. Balloony! I hope this is not true. I need that book badly. When I get to the library, I'm diligently helped by an attendant who swears that this book is part of our collection. We cannot find it on the shelf, but it is listed in the computer. So I go home without the book. Gee, I should have stayed home in the first place and saved myself some gasoline. Next example. I'm getting ready to have breakfast, a dish with a golden sunny side up egg. As I approach the table, I inadvertently kick my right foot against something. I pause for a moment. What could it be? What is in store? I hope my breakfast is not spoiled or the telephone is not going to ring with some bad news. But on contemplating the beautiful sunny side up, it comes to me that some of the egg can splash over my tie and my white shirt. So I pick up a paper towel and place it over my tie and the front of the shirt, and I go on to enjoy that good breakfast. Of course, when I'm done, there are a few drops of grease over the paper towel, and I'm glad that I could prevent the bad omen. After all, that premonitory kick was good for something. I protected my immaculate white shirt from accidental splashes of grease or yolk. I go upstairs to brush my teeth and suddenly freeze when I see myself in the mirror. I had a big splash of grease and yolk on my left sleeve. Damn it, que sera, sera. I could not undo the seal of fate. I could not undo the future. Here, the transactional interpretation of quantum events can be applied. It is also an illustration of the bidirectional arrow of time. Like in an equation, time moves in two directions, E equals to mc squared, goes both ways, from left to right and from right to left. In other words, time moves from the past to the future and from the future to the past. In my premonitory kick, an offer wave moves from the time when the sunny side up was placed on the table, the present to the future, when I am going to splash my shirt with egg and grease. The warning received is the echo wave that moves from the future to the present. All my precautions were an attempt to undo the transaction, but I failed miserably. Someone may think that the premonitory kick is just a coincidence, an exacerbated. Where am I? Someone may think that the premonitory kick is just a coincidence, exacerbated by superstition. This is possible. However, the quantum dimension has room for both. The superstition is a belief that modulates the reality around the believer. It gives currency to the reality of the superstition. Thus, in Afro-Haitian culture, the premonitory kick is a fact of life. Furthermore, as coincidence, the kick falls into the realm of Carl Jung's synchronicity, eerie simultaneous occurrences that are expression of the pluridimensional extrasensory perception. What is the moral of the story? We cannot undo or influence the future when it is sealed by the transaction of the quantum waves. That transaction is a modulation obtained by multiplying the alpha wave with its conjugate echo wave. And the outcome is physical currency, an event that we cannot undo because of boundary constraints. Although our subjectivity plays a great role in the construct of reality, it can do so only within certain limits. The best I could do was to spare my tie and shirt a few drops of grease, but the main event, the big splash, could not be prevented in this type of probability. Thus, knowing the future in quantum land is not worth the effort and the worry. Only predictions made in the classical world of Newton and Euclid can be changed or transformed to some extent. The weather predictions on television can help us to evacuate on time or to look for shelter. But even then, the predictions are not always successful. The science fiction theme of going back into the past to undo some event in order to prevent some future happening is pure fantasy. It cannot be done within the realm of our dimensions. We will see later how an unknown dimension outside of space time can change the past, the present, and the future. The offer and echo wave transaction can be seen also as a localization of the panpsychic field of the EPR paradox. The wave function of my body soul duality extends over the whole universe into the present, the past, and the future. The premonitory kick is a local transaction for a specific event. The transactional waves move at tachyonic speed all over space-time continuum. I was aware of the omen many minutes or hours before it actually materialized itself as space-time event. The existence of that panpsychic field is also responsible for other transactional quantum events such as prophecy, precognition, retrocognition, telepathy, telekinesis, tele, telekinesis, telekinesis, um, exhibited by individuals such as Moses, the lawgiver, Elijah, the Christian Messiah, the apostles, Nostradamus, Edgar Casey, to name a few. The French seer Nostradamus could record quantum probabilities 500 years before they actually occurred, such as the advent of Adolf Hitler and the use of atomic weapons in World War II. When he wrote down the verses of his quatrain, a causality violation took place. The future coalesced with the past and the present as a whole. Hence, the notion of unbroken wholeness of the entire universe, expounded by David Bohm. One second. Hence, the notion of unbroken wholeness of the entire universe, expounded by David Bohm, author of the book Quantum Theory. Hence, the notion of the unbroken wholeness of the entire universe, expounded by David Bohm, author of the book Quantum Theory. The panpsychic dimension of reality allows the composite states of locality and non locality, of brokenness and unbrokenness, separated and not separated. The quantum link between all things in the universe explains how any 2 points in space-time are both separated and not separated. According to Einstein's special theory of relativity, when points are connected by signals going at speed slower than that of light, the points are seen as separate. No, let me take that again. According to Einstein's special theory of relativity, when points are connected by signals going at speeds slower than that of light, the points are seen as separated. When they reach the speed of light, those signals lose their meaning as space and time coalesce. This is the dialectics of space and time. They exist as we know them in ordinary reality because of our slow pace. But even there, my wife's time is more rigid than mine. She claims that I am always late and she's always on time. I guess my notion of space is also different. I think that I can cover in half an hour a distance that would take my spouse 45 minutes. Now, if we could travel at the speed of light, 2 points separated on the continuum of space and time would appear to be the same point in the now. Things are more dramatic with tachyonic speed. Altogether, we could get rid of the prison of time and space. Our body or our consciousness could drop in any time in the past, the present, or the future, or any place instantaneously. This property of quantum reality allows us to identify with the wholeness of the universe in such a manner that the observer becomes the observed. I am what I see. The far reaching implication of that notion has led Erwin Schrödinger to the threshold of Eastern mysticism. He went the way of an Upanishadic seer in saying, I am in the East and in the West. I am below and above. I am this whole world. This is also very close to the artistic and subjective reality of the schizophrenics. And Fred Alan Wolf rightly equates the Schrodinger wholeness with the solipsism of some idealist philosophers. However, a word of caution is necessary at this point. If I am the whole world and quantum dimension, I should not fool myself in believing that I am the whole world and ordinary reality, because I am limited by boundary constraints. The Upanishadic seer or the yogi who discovers his unity with the universal soul through transcendental meditation and trance can enjoy this rapturous state only during the trance state. When they are out of that quantum state, they wake up in the middle of Newtonian reality and its limitations known to us as common sense reality. The search for nirvana is nothing else than release from the shackles of space-time boundary constraints and its cohort of pain, desire, suffering, birth, death, rebirth, and re-death. The glimpse of existence in the wholeness of the universal soul of the Hinduism or the nirvana of the Buddhist create the noble desire to look for release, moksha, from samsara, the wheel of life, with its multiple stations, and to enter the blissful state of the perfect union with Brahman. In the realm of ordinary reality, such postulates as I am the universe is symptomatic of a schizophrenic mental status bordering on insanity. When the Egyptian pharaoh equates himself with the empire, or Louis the was that the 14th, um, with the state of France, Francois Duvalier with the Republic of Haiti, or Father Bertrand Aristide with the people, that is, the mass, which is the Messiah, or theophany of God in his theology. They present to us a composite or complementary state. The health status of, of the pharaoh was a mirror of the viability of the empire. If he was too old and feeble, he was supposed to be put to death and replaced by a young heir. Later on, that dreadful fate was mutated into a ritual of death and rebirth of the Pharaoh, which is a prototype of the redemptive work of the Christian Messiah to save the world. This is all possible in quantum land, but the concrete arm of the composite state engages us to be very cautious in order to prevent delirious effects for the environment and for us. The king or the president will soon discover that his will is not necessarily the will of the empire or of the people. The mass suffering of the dictatorship of Duvalier could not wish away his departure or overthrow. The Duvalier dynasty lasted 30 years. The Duvalier's regime was not eradicated by quantum means, but by three-dimensional coup d'etat. If the power of wave function was at work in the overthrow, considering that the people were wishing him out from the first month of his reign, it took the quantum choice 30 years to manifest itself. Indeed, reality is a matter of choice, but the choices are circumscribed and limited within certain confines. We will see later on how some of the boundaries can be overcome in the alternate state of the Vaudoons. Duvalier was very cozy with the Hougans and the Bocos in Haiti. Many people claim that he was a Vodou priest himself. a devotee of the Loire, Baron Samedi, whose accoutrement he usually wore. Could it be that his initiation in the higher secrets of voodoo helped him to stay in power for so long? Or was it good Machiavellian or intelligence machinations? Could it be a combination of both? Between the head of state and the people, there is a clash of will. Whose will is going to predominate in the construct of reality? Who really has the free will in the destiny of the nation or the empire? Within the notion of free will, there is also that of freedom. Is there such a thing in a highly deterministic world? If it exists, can it be seen as an offshoot of our quantum wave function? Is freedom a corollary of the principle of indeterminacy? Freedom and will and free will do not appear to be the resultant of that principle, insofar as as it denotes our inability to predict certain occurrences with accuracy. Quantum indeterminacy is different from simple choice in alternate states, actions, and systems. In our vital systems, atoms, electrons, and other particles, in our vital systems, atoms, electrons, and other particles are facing choices at every instant. But they are not the choices of the principle of indeterminacy. Furthermore, free will is not a corollary of causality violation. There is no reversal of cause and effect when we exercise our free will. Here, we may choose a course of action or a behavior that is outside a set or a system of cause and effect. In our reality, there is a crisscrossing of causalities. Multiple systems of cause and effect are crisscrossing and intertwined. Sometimes they harmonize their aims, sometimes they are in frank opposition or open warfare. Human physiology reveals an array of deterministic functions involving about 6 trillion reactions in every cell every second. Physiology is the most coordinated, intelligent manifestation of nature. All of these reactions function in a deterministic fashion with the finality. It is not the product of random chaos. The wave function of our dual nature is also at work in these multitudes of reactions. It can influence them in one direction or another, but it does so within limits. Our actions, our freedom or free will are illimited within a certain limit. We should not fool ourselves. That illimited action is very restricted. Those 6 million reactions taking place in every second inside ourselves constitute an infinite number, an unlimited number of physiological reactions. But they constitute also a boundary. Some violation means death. Free will is not absolute freedom. It is freedom to make a choice within a set of predetermined choices. Some choices mean life, others mean death. The quantum principle of indeterminacy is one of the limitations imposed on our freedom or our free will. Is there such a thing as free will? The answer to that question is a relative one. The universal intelligence, or the creator, or the immanent God, has also predetermined in what manner we are going to exercise our free will. He already knows the open, the he already knows the option of the choice that we are going to make. What we are is highly predetermined, in part in our genome or set of genes. The interaction of the genome with nature will produce individuals whose behaviors and actions correspond to a predetermined set of choices in a built-in programming. That predetermination should not be confused with the narrow predestination of Jean Calvin and other fundamentalist theologians. in which God has already decided before the foundation of the world who is going to be saved. It is the mechanism of salvation that is predetermined, and also the set of choices concerning that salvation. The programmer knows all the options and all the decisions, but he does not impose a choice to an individual at every step in all matters. The final decision remains with the individual. There are occasions when Yahweh exercises his own free will in dealing with human decisions. There is crisscrossing of will between God and men. God wanted to warn the Ninevites about an imminent doom, so he chose the prophet Jonah for that ministry. But Jonah did not like the Ninevites, who have been a nation of oppressors for his own people. Thus, he decided to go elsewhere to preach. Here is a clash of will between God and a human being. As long as we accept God as a person, we have to recognize his right to free will as well. He has his own agenda, and Jonah has his own as well. Who is going to predominate in that struggle? God did in the occurrence, but not in a dictatorial way. He did not prevent Jonah from making his own choice or exercising his free will to go to Spain instead of Nineveh. Jonah's choice led him in the middle of a storm and a shipwreck. God took advantage of the situation by rescuing Jonah from death when a monster fish swallowed him up and threw him out of the shore, out on the shore of Nineveh, where he had no choice than to give praise to God and to perform his duty of prophet by preaching repentance. The Hebrew God Yahweh has exercised his deterministic power in very specific situations while respecting the limited free will of the individuals. In this manner, he chose Abraham, Moses, Jacob, David, Elijah, Isaiah, Jesus of Nazareth, and the Apostle Paul, to name a few. At times, he seems to make the wrong choice. Many of these people followed God reluctantly. Abraham did not always use his faith when in danger. He lied twice about his wife being his sister in order to escape death from the lusty kings. Jacob imposed some conditions to God in order to accept him as his God. And scriptures say that God loved Jacob and hated Esau before their very birth. However, that does not mean Esau is eternally lost. This is not an after death outcome. It is election from a job on earth to be the progenitor of the nation of Israel. The deterministic power of God and that of nature does not eliminate the existence of human free will. They transact with it in a complementary manner or composite fashion, and at times constitute a menace to its very existence. Lust is a composite situation for the Christian. The deterministic workings of his physiology are in contradiction with the lofty ethic of the Messiah. The brain is one of the major sex organs in our species. The sight of a voluptuous woman triggers a cascade of physical chemical reactions in our organism. That is a built-in programming for the perpetuation of the species, and nature makes it enjoyable so we do not lose interest in reproduction. If it was a painful experience, many of us would have dropped out of the marathon long ago. We would be an extinct species like the dinosaurs. That is what the mass of hypocrites in the United States feigned not to understand when former President Jimmy Carter confessed to Playboy magazine that he has lusted in his heart after women. The bigots wanted to crucify him because he revealed himself a normal man. The poor guy could not help it. He was made to be like that. That is a deterministic decree of nature. That biological decree does not ask a consent for reproduction from the male or female person, or the female person, from the male or the female person. It was programmed them to fire the flame of lust when they are in the situation. However, the human species can override the deterministic physical chemical reaction of libido, of libido by restraining the urge to chase or capture the voluptuous Aphrodite. By exercising that other deterministic programming called free will, he resolves the antagonism of the complementary state. The free will programming comes about by education, sets of do's and don'ts, menaces and rewards. Rewards. The disobedience of Adam and Eve is an illustration of the composite state in which two opposite sets of instructions are given to the couple. Um, Eating of the fruit of the tree will lead to death according to God, or to deification through knowledge, according to Satan. There is a cause and effect mechanism established by the Creator in ingesting the fruit, the type of fruit that makes you salivate like a Pavlov's dog. Its appearance is very inviting, but the instructions are a set of choices creating a dilemma in the minds of the couple. God is also facing a dilemma. Why place beings created in the image of God Himself in front of such a temptation? Was God responding to a challenge or a bet presented by Satan? In accepting the challenge, God was playing dice. Adam and Eve were already godlike. They were created in the likeness of God. Thus, the enticement of Satan to become like God would be easy to brush aside. But the adversary used the twist in his argument. He played on awakening their pride by suggesting they were ignorant. He played on awakening their pride by suggesting they were ignorant. And they gave in. The result was death. By opposing that causality of death was the causality of redemption. First in the law of Moses, and secondly in the sacrificial atonement of Christ on the cross. Here again, salvation is offered through free will. We have to make a choice to accept or reject that means of redemption. The deterministic will of God seems to be in a superposition state with man's free will. However, man's free will is subjected to boundary constraints. The Creator's free will dominates all alternate wills. He established the set of choices and the manner our choice constructs and the manner our choice constructs reality. All alternate realities are pre-established. All free will is pre-established, as they can be exercised only within the confines of the principle of immanence that postulates the universe emanates from God and must return to God. This would be an equivalent of Poincaré's return. The notion of recurrence or eternal return of things laid down by the Stoic philosophers, by the samsaric cycles of life, by the study of seasons, of history, has been codified by the French mathematician Henri Poincaré in Ethereum. The mathematical expression applied to isolated systems, for example, the universe itself, which, given enough time, will return to its initial state and will do so infinitely often in a cyclic manner. That cyclic recurrence can be envisaged as the bidirectional arrows of time. It is present in the equations of classical physics as well as in quantum reality. In their determinism, the equations can recall the past and foresee the future when the initial data are known. From a vitalist point of view, the universe, as an isolated system, emanated from immanence, the alpha and omega of all existence, is subjected to the law of recurrence either through E equals mc squared or the law of the conservation of energy, or, or entropy through birth and death in biology, health and disease, recovery and pathology, or in evolution, seen as a trajectory of being from alpha to omega and vice versa. The complexification process tends toward the concretization concretization of the image of God in nature, or Brahman in Atman, as a fractal or hologram manifestation of the universal soul, repeating the display of self similarity at all levels of creation or evolution. The Poincaré's return is very strong in the alternate realities. It is at work in avatars, materialization of spiritual entities into our three dimensional common sense reality that are followed by a return to their initial state. In the macroscopic world of our everyday reality, the arrow of time assumes irreversibility. My progenitor, who no longer exists, went through birth, maturity, and death. He is not returning as my father in our three dimensional world. His equation has reached equilibrium and has stopped. However, the microscopic level, his arrow of time existence went by in a bidirectional way from the past to the future, atoms to man, and then from the future to the past, man to atoms, in a manner reminiscent of the Genesis principle. Thou art dust, and into dust thou shalt return. Genesis 3:19. In the alternate reality of Vodou, we will see later how a strong Poincaré's return is at work in the claims of the Zandor society, in what we shall call the Zandoric phenomenon. The macroscopic is changed into wave function, allowing tele- teletransportation, 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 ubiquity, and then is changed back into the initial macroscopic state. In metamorphoses, the Zandorist goes from man to wave function to animal, and then to wave function and to man. They seemingly have acquired the formula that allows singularities forbidden by Roger Penrose in his cosmic censorship, which is a decree without theoretical justification, establishing a dogma stating that naked singularities are forbidden in our universe. The beam me up Scotty in Star Trek is a typical singularity. The my God, the censorship. The censorship makes sense in the confines of our common sense reality and into that other face of modern science named thermodynamics. The theorists of the latter science want to recognize only an irreversible arrow of time in the complex macroscopic world of ours. The arrow of time is unidirectional, that is, a non dialectical point of view. It is highly probable that time evolution is reversible and dissipative, dynamical, and is reversible in dissipative dynamical systems like it is in conservative linear dynamical ones. Let me take that again. One second. It is highly probable that time evolution is reversible in dissipative dynamical systems like it is in conservative linear dynamical ones. The surprise creations issued from a non-linear chaotic system in which self-organization popped up out of chaos are more likely the manifestation of reversibility when order moves into chaos and then goes back into a new order. The theoretical physicists of thermodynamics have recognized that quantum mechanics and thermodynamics constitute a Janus type figure, or the opposite sides of the same coin. They have acknowledged that the complex structure of the world overwhelms our linguistics, and our brains are dazzled by quantum physics. They have acknowledged that the complex structure of the world overwhelms our linguistics, and our brains are bedazzled by quantum physics. Other analogies exist. Other analogies exist between the two disciplines, as pinpointed by the Brussels School, represented by Ilya Prigogine, Maurice Courbage, and by Baidyanath Misra. They have found that a complete knowledge or certainty in the description of thermodynamical system destroys its view. That is the equivalent of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Also, there is a complementary vision of time. In one, reversibility dominates the dynamical equations, and in the other, irreversibility reigns amidst fluctuations, uncertainty, and chaos. The latter is our common sense reality, which is a world of instability and decay or entropy toward death and equilibrium. However, this complementary vision may be the result of differences in interpretation of entropy. Usually, entropy means increased disorder. Sometimes, entropy means return to the simplicity of uniformity or equilibrium or death. In this acceptation, chaos means uniformity as opposed to complexity. That change that change of direction towards simplicity can be seen as a reversal of the arrow's direction. Furthermore, when we go beyond equilibrium into the dissipative systems that are capable of creating new entities through self organization, we are in the presence of a new arrow's direction, a new reversibility. This in itself is a new order that some scientists call also chaos. Here also chaos is victim of the complementarity principle. On one side it is uniformity, simplicity, rest, and death. And on the other side, it is instability, fluctuations, complexification, disturbances, disaggregation, decay, destruction, and death. In one of the tools used by the physicists to study thermodynamics, this design, designated phase space portraits or gallery, there are regions of regular behavior coexisting side by side with regions of irregular behavior. A novel aspect of the Poincaré's return is implied to this gallery. It is the version of Poincaré's non-integratable systems. Scientists came up with a theorem establishing that the Poincaré's non-intelligible systems represent an intermediate stage between complete regularity and utter chaos. This is the CAM theory, named after Kol- Kolmogorov, Arnold, and Moser, Moser. Linearity or simplicity does not dominate in nature. Complexity is the order of things in the universe. To maintain the concept of irreversibility, some scientists in the field of thermodynamics have reduced the meaning of entropy only to that of change. That is, a measure of the capacity for change in an isolated macroscopic system. In that sense, the direction of evolution does not count. What matters is change only. The CAM theorem has re-established some harmony with the dialectics of nature. We have we have to recognize that irreversibility is a fact of life in many aspects of our everyday common sense reality. If I turn 100 years old, I might be seen as a distinguished old decrepit centenarian. But I will never be again that handsome 30 something that used to make the girls go gaga. Thus, the concept of aging itself seems to be an irreversible phenomenon, highly visible in biology, standing in opposition to the claims of Deepak Chopra and ageless body timeless mind. The irreversible process of aging can be slowed down or accelerated, but nevertheless remains relentless. It will stop at death. It will stop at death. At this point, it will retrace the trajectory from order to disorder, from the macroscopic to the elemental. The CAM theory can be seen at work in the treatment of anorexia nervosa, an accelerated aging process from starvation and other biological substances and other biological disturbances leads to premature aging, where a young woman 25 years old presents with the body of a 95-year-old woman. A successful therapeutic regimen will bring her back to the status of her third decade. If there is no relapse, she will lead a normal life with a slow aging process until equilibrium at death. Thus, inside that isolated system, which is a body mind complex, there are complementarity of time arrows. This complex coexists with other complexes with their own time sequences and arrows inside that huge isolated system, which is the universe, where stands absolute time being the trajectory of space time toward the immanence, the alpha and omega of existence. The trajectory of absolute time is a full circle manifested as forward or backward arrows on local or fractional space time. Quantum reality and thermodynamics constitute parallel or crisscrossing realms in our space time. In some circumstances, where a superposition of states exists in quantum land, such as the overriding of two parallel branches of reality, one very common and the other rare or maverick, one can obtain unexpected results like the Lorentz butterfly effect, the Lorentz attractors, or Mandelbrot's fractal pattern of very complex designs. Besides these two realms of reality, there are what Hugh Everett III in 1957 called parallel universes of quantum physics. The words parallel universes are misleading because they presuppose existence of universes outside our space time universe. In fact, what Everett is talking about is subdivisions inside our own universe. The idea originated with the electron existing at the same time in multiple orbits around the atom's nucleus. Thus, it exists in each of many dizzying numbers of parallel universes observed or manifested as the single electronic cloud. From there, the universe is seen as a big quantum world with a multitude of branches spreading out in spacetime. Those branches are all potentialities existing at the same time as parallel universes. For Everett, the universe is a big universal wave function that spreads out into smaller branches or micro universes. And every individual exists in a fractal manner in all the branches, in all the potential worlds or parallel micro universes. The notion of unbroken wholeness of the universe leads to the implication that we are the branches and we are in the branches at the same time. We are the branches and we are in the branches. Furthermore, the numbers of branches are not fixed. They keep spreading as more interactions take place between existing branches. Here we can see an analogy with the dissipative systems of thermodynamics. Our quantum world is constantly splitting into multiple copies of itself, clones, a billion replica of itself. When two persons share the same experience, they are on the same layer or branch, and this layer is also subdivided into billions of micro branches. Hugh Everett came up with the idea of parallel universes in an attempt to eliminate the role of consciousness in creating reality or to eradicate the role of subjectivity. For him, all possible editions of reality, additions, not additions, but additions, like edit. For him, all possible editions of reality are already in existence. In his doctoral thesis at Princeton University, Everett argued that no consciousness is necessary in quantum mechanics. The future is not determined by consciousness, but that all possible futures really happen. The idea of a simple universe that can be altered by consciousness should be discarded and replaced by that of an infinite number of parallel universes, all moving on well ordered flows into the future. And we are on all of them. In order to give physical currency to any one of the branches or layers, we just have to become aware of the branch that we are in and keep choosing which branch to live in. In that sense, consciousness is not discarded, but remains the element that gives currency to physical reality. The panpsychic implication of the EPR paradox makes consciousness an ever present reality in quantum physics. Bryce S. Dewitt and Neil Graham, in many worlds' interpretation of quantum mechanics, accept Everett's idea that normal worlds occur in greater abundances than maverick worlds of utter chaos. But they postulate that in order to get to any branch of the multiple branching universe, we have to become aware of what we want to do. Awareness is consciousness. Thus, reality will remain a matter of choice. By remembering that we are on all branches or all possible editions of reality, we just have to keep choosing on which edition we wish to sample life. One of the startling assumptions of this quantum mechanics interpretation is that in order to fly or float in the air, we should exist into those maverick worlds. Wait, what? One of the startling assumptions of this quantum mechanics interpretation is that in order to fly or float in the air, we should exist into those maverick worlds where such things are possible. How do we enter them if we are already in all the editions of reality? The answer is just become aware. However, this is not an everyday occurrence in our three dimensional world. All of us have experienced flying and floating in the air in our dreams. Besides that, the only claim of such feats has come from the alternate reality of the Vaudoons. We shall consider those phenomena in more detail later on when we enter the shadow reality of the Haitian space time and its singularities or oddities. From the enchanted world of quantum reality came Disneyland of 10 dimensions, Kaku 1994. We did not have to argue much with Professor Einstein when he proposed to marry time with our three-dimensional world. We did not have to argue much with Professor Einstein when he proposed to marry time with our three-dimensional world. Space-time is a household word nowadays. Length, depth, height, and maybe time are easy to get along with. But other scientists like Theodore Kaluza and Oscar Klein came up with a fifth dimension called gravity. We were very comfortable with Newton's description of gravity as the force that makes us fall on our buttocks when we skid in the snow. But uneasiness gets into our soul when Einstein came up with the idea that gravity was just curves in space that make us stumble and keeps the planets into orbits around the sun. Experimental physicists proved him right. In fact, matter distorts space-time by creating smooth curves in it. Kaluza in 1921 went further and proposed the proposition and negative objects that and proposed that positive and negative objects seem to behave differently because they are not really in the same location. He theorized that electric charge is the result of an object being located in a hidden fifth dimension of space-time. A fifth dimension would account for the forces of both attraction and repulsion with curves and depressions similar to Einstein's gravity curvature. A fifth dimension traction curvature would be like a depression in an otherwise flat surface. An object rolling along the surface would veer toward the center of the depression. A repulsion curvature would be like a hill in an otherwise flat surface. An object rolling along the surface would veer away from the center of the hill. Let me take that again. A fifth dimension, this quote here, a fifth dimension would account for the forces of both attraction and repulsion, with curves and depressions similar to Einstein's gravity curvature. A fifth dimension attraction curvature would be like a depression in an otherwise flat surface. An object rolling along the surface would veer toward the center of the depression. A repulsion curvature would be like a hill in an otherwise flat surface. An object rolling along the surface would veer away from the center of the hill. But the wizards of Quantum Land had other recipes in their bags. They liked the idea of force as far as gravity was concerned. In fact, by 1950, they were conducting their foray deeper into the subatomic world. They soon discovered two additional forces, the strong and the weak forces. By 1975, they explained that the strong force is responsible for the attraction that binds together quarks in sets of three to form protons and neutrons in the atomic nuclei. The weak force is the power at work in certain kinds of radioactive decay, such as the metamorphosis of a neutron into a proton. Those forces, along with the electromagnetic force and gravity, were to receive treatment like that of light. They were transported across the space between particles by quanta and bundles of energy. These point like bundles were also nicknamed messenger particles. The photon, was the messenger particle from the electromagnetic force. The gluon was the strong force messenger. The weakon was that of the weak force. The graviton transmitted the force of gravity between massive objects. Using particle accelerators, physicists have discovered the existence of gluon and weakon in the late 1970s and early 1980s. All of these forces led the theoretical physicists to the concept of a simple master force that initiated the beginning of spacetime. There is an analogy between this master force and our concept of energy emanating by fiat from the immanence principle in our neo-vitalist world vision. With all those forces to deal with, the scientists soon came up with supergravity theories that postulate the existence of more dimensions in reality than the five known as space, time, and gravity. That was to be followed by the superstrings theory of Michael Green and John Swartz in 1984. The latter physicists envisioned particles as tiny one dimensional strings instead of point like quanta. Graviton, for example, in a closed string, and all the other messenger particles, photon, gluon, and weakon, are open strings. The simplest superstring theory, proposed by Green and Schwartz, calls for 10 dimensions, including the familiar four dimensions of Einstein's space-time. The other six dimensions are very small, as in Kaluza-Klein theories. They are just wide enough to allow a superstring to turn. The beauty of the superstring theories lies in the attempt to unify the four forces of nature while at the same time blend the concept of Einstein's smooth curved spacetime with the concept of messenger particles transmitting forces in tiny jumps of quanta. The existence of extra dimensions is a little bit difficult to understand. They seem to be more obvious at the infinitesimal end of the universe scale. There, the fundamental particles appear as folded up strings, with the folds occurring in as many as six other dimensions. The concept of these hidden dimensions is also associated with more stupendous concept, that of shadow matter. According to some new theories developed by subatomic physicists, we may be sharing our reality with another world made up of invisible, intangible shadow matter or dark matter, operating in at least 10 dimensions. The idea of dark matter came to the forefront in 1930 when the Swiss American Fritz Zwicky calculated that galaxies in large clusters were moving so fast that the gravity provided by the visible stars was insufficient to hold the galaxies together. His calculation brought forth the first inkling that there was much more matter in the cosmos than meets the eye. Scientists in the field now estimate that the unseen matter makes up about 90 or perhaps 99% of the universe mass. Goodness, 99? Yikes. The existence of dark matter poses a challenge to the quantum theorist in that its existence is not a matter of choice, as far as the presence of the observer is concerned. The consciousness of the observer does not make it pop in or out of existence. It is a singularity in the reality of the existence. We know now that our universe is full of that shadow matter. Our very own Milky Way is full of it, and we are unaware of it through our sense perception. We cannot see it because we see mainly by means of electromagnetism, and shadow matter does not emit light. Also, it is not detectable by radio telescopes, infrared, or X ray instruments. Furthermore, shadow matter passes freely through ordinary matter so that we cannot feel it like we feel ordinary objects that we touch. That reminds us of the ghosts that populate the imagination of the superstitious people. However, the presence of the dark matter is undetected. However, the presence of the dark matter is detectable by the gravitational effects it exerts in the galaxies of the universe. Large amounts of that invisible matter exert stronger gravitational forces than would be expected from the amount of matter visible in the stars, gas, and dust in the galaxies. Let me take that again. Large amounts of that invisible matter exert stronger gravitational forces than would be expected. I see. Now, the next big questions are, what is dark matter? What does dark matter consist of? We still don't know exactly what it is made of. But as usual, we have many theories. Before going any further, we should remember that dark matter is not antimatter. The latter, that is antimatter, is the counterpart of any atomic particle that is the same in all respect except charge. For example, the positron is exactly like the electron, but has a positive charge. When antimatter meets matter, the two destroy each other in a burst of pure energy. Some astronomers believe that shadow matter consists of dead stars, neutron stars, or the celebrated black holes, the collapsed cores of dead stars, or balls of gas located mainly in the halos surrounding the galaxies. But as Stephen Hawking would say, black holes ain't that black. They emit something over the event horizon that can be picked up by our instruments. Furthermore, those bodies are made of ordinary matter that either gives off radiation in the form of light like stars do, reflects it like planets do or absorbs it like dust does. Some other astronomers believe that dark matter is something far more exotic, such as an unknown form of matter left over from the earliest moment of creation. They suspect that it is not made of atoms at all. Astronomers have surveyed the cosmos at all wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum and have been unable to find any radiation in the shadow matter halos. Thus, physicists have come to propose the existence of unknown new particles. We already know the fundamental building blocks of matter consist of six types of quarks, six types of leptons, and their antiparticles. These fundamental particles are governed by four fundamental forces of nature. Particle physicists further divide the fundamental elementary particles into two types, fermions and bosons. Fermions include the 6666 team of quarks, leptons, protons, neutrons, and counterparts. Bosons include particles of the four fundamental forces of nature that transmit forces between fermions, such as gluon, weakon, photon, and graviton. The physicists, in their attempt to unify all the fundamental forces, that is, bosons, into a single force or master force of the universe, came up with the existence of exotic particles. In the so called supersymmetry theory, they envision that for every kind of boson, there is a corresponding kind of fermion, and for every kind of fermion, there is a corresponding kind of boson. For example, the photon boson would have a fermion partner called a photino. The electron fermion would have a boson partner called the selectron. Yikes. The quarks fermions would have bosons partner called squark. Oh boy. The lighter supersymmetric partners surviving the Big Bang because of stability would be the dark matter or shadow matter. Thus, the dark matter particle would have a mass several times greater than a proton and yet would interact weakly with other particles. This is what the particle physicists call the WIMP, weakly interacting massive particle. Weakly interacting massive particles would be very hard to detect because of their weak interactions with ordinary matter. In reality, many of the weak interacting massive particles that form dark matter in our own galaxy may be going through our body at this instant without our being aware of it. However, once in a very great while, one of the weak interacting massive particles would collide with the nucleus of an atom in ordinary matter. Beside the WIMPs, weak interacting massive particles, the physicists have come up with other particulate entities as dark matter candidates. One is the axion and the other neutrino. Like the WIMPs, the axions interact weakly with ordinary matter, but are much less massive. A very interesting feature of this particle entity is that in a strong magnetic field, an axion would be transformed into a photon, that is, a particle of ordinary matter. The neutrino, wait, let me take that again. The axions interact weakly with ordinary matter but are much less massive. A very interesting feature of this particle entity is that in a strong magnetic field, an axion would be transformed into a photon. Interesting. The neutrino is known to exist for real. Three types are produced when atomic nuclei or subatomic particles disintegrate. If any of those neutrinos show up with a mass, it could be the shadowy dark matter particle. Many astronomers have their reservations in this occurrence. Neutrino dark matter, also called hot dark matter, would produce top down galaxy formation, in which superclusters of gas and neutrinos formed first and then broke down into galaxies. Some astronomers think that the cold dark matter identified as weak interacting massive um, particles One second. Some astronomers think that the cold dark matter identified as weakly interacting massive particles or axions would produce bottom up galaxy formation. The latter fits very weakly the conventional current vision of galaxies. Still, the search is on to reveal the identity of those mysterious ghost like particles left over from the violent birth or Big Bang of the universe and known to us as dark matter or shadow matter. It cannot be seen with our naked eyes or with our sophisticated instruments because it does not give off or reflect electromagnetic radiation. Its presence can be inferred from the way its gravity affects visible matter. Also, this means that it might not be made of atoms, the building blocks of ordinary reality. In that sense, it constitutes a true parallel universe, a completely different realm of reality existing side by side and intertwined with our common sense reality and its quantum dimension. Mark David, Richard Mueller, and Pierre Hutt have suggested that our sun might have an invisible companion dubbed by them with the ominous name of Nemesis. The latter would have a vast elongated orbit around the sun, and its periodic sweeps would and its periodic sweeps around the sun and on its periodic sweeps around the sun, it would disturb comets located beyond Pluto, sending them plunging into the inner solar system to create havoc. Considering that dark matter occupies 86% of the total density of the universe, while ordinary matter, with all its variety and richness, accounts only 14%, there is plenty of room for an overabundance of alternate realities. The realm of dark matter should not be reduced to the presence of mass and gravity counteracting the expansion of the universe and leading eventually in a very distant future to the big crunch. The parallel universe of the shadow matter could include an abundant variety of subparallel worlds with living entities existing in multiple dimensions, as seen in the superstring theory, and responsible for many unexplained phenomena reported by psychics, seers, schizophrenics, and ordinary people, such as apparition, materialization, dematerialization, metamorphosis, levitation, psychokinesis, teletransportation, and ubiquity. These unexplained phenomena would be produced by the interactions of the shadow universe with our wave function or quantum dimension. At this point, we can postulate that all other reality or dimensions enter into interactions with our common sense reality first through our quantum dimension or wave function. Let's take that again. At this point, we can postulate that all other reality or dimensions enter into interactions with our common sense reality first through our quantum dimension or wave function. In that regard, the realm of the Vodouns, that alternate reality of the Haitian world vision, is rich in manifestations of these interactions. Furthermore, considering the vast amount of dark matter in the universe and its presence in the Milky Way, our own galaxy, it won't be far fetched to imply of its very presence in the composition of everything on planet Earth, including Homo sapiens himself. The ancient Egyptians, and after them, the Greeks and the Judeo Christians, have always maintained that the nature of mankind is tripartite, with body, soul, and spirit. The teaching of the monotheistic religions maintains that one of the components of mankind is immortal, principally the soul or the spirit. This reflects the influence of Platonism on their theologies. However, some texts of the biblical scriptures testifies to the contrary. The Genesis principle establishes that we are dust and into dust we shall return. In the Garden of Eden there were two trees, one of the knowledge of good and evil, and the other of eternal life. The human couple choose not to eat of the tree of life, although they were permitted to do so. In the gospel, Jesus of Nazareth taught that the soul can die, but through redemption, it can acquire eternal life. The jungle tribe Sora in eastern India teaches that the soul of deceased will die a second death many years after their departure. The Dagara tribe of Burkina Faso teaches that the Kontombile, or spirits of the parallel universe, although they live a very long time, probably centuries or millennia, will finally know death as well. This situation may explain why the main thrust of the Christian Messiah's teaching was the acquisition of eternal life, a passage or metamorphosis of time into eternity. In the Egyptian cosmogonies, the being is composed of three principles: the Zed or Ket, Zed or Het, which is the physical body capable of decomposition after death, the Ba, or body's corporeal soul, corporeal soul, considered as the double, or the body throughout Black Africa and in Haiti. The Ka is a spiritual principle that rejoins the divine in heaven after death. So the Zed, the Ba, and the Ka. Zed, physical body; Ba, soul; Ka, spiritual principle. These principles would correspond to our 20th century concept of visible matter. Z, or body, with its wave function; the dark matter, Ba, or soul; and the Ka, or spirit, which is pure energy from the boson family. At any rate, the search is still on for that elusive master force, the single primal force from which came all the fermions and bosons, including top quark and the Higgs boson. The latter is supposed to impart stability to all matter. It plays a crucial role in the universe by allowing matter to stand still. Without the Higgs boson, named after the British physicist Peter Higgs, all other particles would have no mass and would be in perpetual motion at the speed of light. The primal master force would be essentially a psychic force, or psychion, imparting consciousness to all derivatives in accordance to our neo-vitalist principle of immanence. The alternate reality of the Vodouns would be a psychionic world, existing in parallel with our common sense reality and sharing all the characteristics of the quantum world and of shadow matter. The Vodou mentality, by exhibiting a multidimensional vision of the universe, seems to correspond well to what Michio Kaku called the theory of hyperspace. This is the newest version of the grand unified theory. It is the refinement of the Kaluza-Klein theory, supergravity, the superstring theory of Green and Schwartz, enlightened in 1985 by Edward Witten's new field theory using powerful mathematical and geometric theorems. It is a beautiful supersymmetric theory that contains the solutions to the problems that have tormented the physicists in search of the scientific holy grail. The theory of hyperspace has established the existence of a 10-dimensional universe with plenty of room for the alternate reality of the African Haitian mysticism. The next chapter will introduce the reader to the fantastic dimension of the Vodou world.